What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 12 of Mets Off Day Live. I'm your host, Chelsea Sherrod, and joining us today are SNY MLB insider Andy Martino and frequent SNY contributor Anthony McCarron. We are going to talk all things Mets and also the trade deadline over the next half an hour. And we will also be taking some fan questions live as they come in, so make sure you put them in the chat wherever you are watching. But first, welcome to the show, Anthony and Andy. How you guys doing?
Great, Chelsea. How are you?
You know, we're powering through. Trade deadline weekend was a busy one for the Mets and for us. I'm sure for you too, Andy.
Yeah, but I'm good. I tell you what, it is a privilege to be the kind of person who people might think knows something about the game that we love. So this is a good time of year.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, before we get into the Mets trade deadline moves so far, let's talk about the last off day. So during the last off day, Mark Canha went to dinner with his wife at Don Angie in New York City. Edwin Diaz played some baseball with a foam bat, of course, in the pool. And Brett Beatty stopped by the Anthony and Son Panini shop in Brooklyn. So Andy, starting with you, which off day sounds the best?
Am I going to dinner with Mark Canha's wife or my wife in this question?
You can bring your wife along.
I bet you the Canha family is absolutely lovely. I know Mark.
Yeah.
So this is what I would do. You know, Edwin Diaz is lovely too. Oh gosh, this is harder than I thought. I thought I was going with a dinner when I saw the rundown, but now I'm thinking it through. Like, if I could say, hey guys, I played baseball with Edwin Diaz with a foam bat in a pool. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
And it'd be like, that's probably a better story than being in a restaurant. But I really Canha's got a good, I'm going to talk about this for the next 30 minutes or so. Canha's got a good sense of food. He's a foodie. He's got a fun kind of vibe. Really interesting guy to talk to.
Yeah.
I want to play baseball with Edwin Diaz and Mark Canha's family in a pool, and my family can come too. Nice summer. How about that? With some some catering that Canha chooses.
Yes, a nice family barbecue. All right, Anthony, what do you think?
Well, in my effort, Chelsea, to support all businesses with the name Anthony in them, or most anyway, I would go for the panini with Brett Beatty. Although Andy makes a great point, Mark Canha is a renowned foodie who loves to blog about it, all that kind of stuff. And so you know that he knows good chow. In fact, I once saw he had Instagrammed a picture of some meal he had at a restaurant that my family and I had been to recently. And we were practically like high-fiving each other in our living room because we had picked a Mark Canha place. So
did you talk to Canha about that?
I have not, no. But that would be
better hurry.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be a good topic.
Well, I got to hang out with Mark Canha a little bit more. I'm a foodie too. Okay, so let's get into where the Mets stand. So a lot has happened in the week since their last off day. On the field, they split a 2-game set with the Yankees, took 3 of 4 from the Nationals, bringing them to 14-9 for the month of July and 50-55 overall. But off the field, the front office dealt David Robertson and Max Scherzer with more potentially on the way, which we will get into more detail about in a bit. But Anthony, starting with you, did you think that there was any chance going into last week that the Mets wouldn't sell at the deadline?
Well, Chelsea, optimist that I am, I was hoping that they would give it a little bit more to right up to the deadline before they started. I understand why they have done what they've done, but I also feel like they weren't that far out of it. And, you know, the roster, though it hasn't played up to its capability, obviously, all you have to do is watch a week's worth of Met games to know that the team as a whole is not playing well. And maybe that was the reason why you couldn't believe. But they do have a roster stocked with a lot of talented guys. 2 of them are gone now, obviously. But so, yeah, I mean, I kind of hope that they would give it a go. Other teams in similar spots are doing that for their own reasons. The Mets chose another way, and here we are.
Yeah, Andy, what are your thoughts on that?
Chelsea, what is that background behind you? I know I don't have a Hall of Fame background, but what are you?
I'm in my apartment, but this is like a textured wall. It's like cement.
Oh, it's like a stylized thing. I see.
Yes, yeah.
It looks good, Chelsea.
No, thank you. I'm not in here for much longer, so just say hello and goodbye to the textured.
Now that I've been told it's your home, it looks wonderful. Lovely. Let me answer your question. Look, the Mets didn't want to sell. They were really hoping that they could go on a run. Going back to that series against the White Sox, they won 2-3. They wanted to sweep. Like, oh, let's sweep the White Sox. And then, what did they have after that? Before the Yankees series, Anthony, remind me,
Boston.
It's been such a blur. Boston, thank you. Let's sweep the White Sox. Let's win 2 or 3 in Boston. Let's sweep the Yankees. That would have done it. But one thing that I'm learning about Steve Cohen's ownership is now we're a couple years into covering him. It's different from baseball. A really key thing that we're starting to understand about Cohen. Baseball teams are pretty conservative at the pace at which they pivot and move strategies. This guy is like, buy, whoop, sell. Like, it's not a lot of sentimental value to it. It's like we watched him extremely aggressive in his pursuit of Max Scherzer, who was a free agent two off seasons ago. Like, he was going to get Max Scherzer. And at that time, people thought it was ridiculous to think that Scherzer would come to the Mets. But in terms of personal recruiting, Steve and Alex Cohen talking to Scherzer and his wife, and in terms of offering him record money, he was so aggressive in getting him, but then he was totally comfortable a few days ago pivoting on a dime and being like, sell him, listen on Verlander. I think it's pretty interesting because baseball, as I said, tends to move at a more glacial pace. And this guy is coming from the hedge fund world where apparently buy, sell happens a little faster. So that's what we should learn going forward, too. Never talk that big picture about Steve Cohen's Mets with confidence because he's willing to pivot on a dime. And that's what they've done.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so going back to the Robertson trade, let's go through the timeline of events. So Thursday night, the Mets run into a rain delay in the 8th inning with Robertson warming up before that rain delay came in. So the game comes back, but Robertson is not on the mound to close it out. Then he's traded to the Marlins for 2 minor league prospects. Andy, how do you value the return that they got for Robertson now that the dust has settled in?
Well, Chelsea, anyone telling you too much about that or trying to pick a winner or loser of a trade for an 18-year-old player is obviously overstating their knowledge. So I try not to fall into that. We can say that they got good value for a rental player in terms of deals that might be out there for a rental player. They have a prospect in particular, the middle infielder, whose name is anyone?
Marco
Vargas.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marco Vargas. And this is why I'm not trying to sit here and act like an expert on 18-year-old players. This is not something that's within our purview. If we can remember their names every day, we're lucky enough. Let's not try to act like we know what this guy's going to turn into. But Marco Vargas is somebody who they scouted extensively in the Florida Complex League. So the way this works is a lot of games are played in the Mets complex in Port St. Lucie and then just down 95 at the Marlins complex in Jupiter. So it's not like the Mets just had scouts on this young player. They had Billy Epler was able to call their player development people, their coaches, their people who see this guy all the time on their backfields, spring training games, complex games, and get a lot more intel on him than they would normally get on a young 18-year-old player. So they feel really excited about this return. We don't know what Brett Beatty's going to turn into, let alone Marco Vargas. So let's not get carried away. But in terms of like industry saying that we like this guy's potential, absolutely, they seem to have done a nice job.
Yeah. Anthony, do you think there's a chance that the Mets re-sign Robertson next season?
I mean, if they're wise, they would certainly consider it, Chelsea, because David Robertson, look, relievers are, they can go up and down so quickly and so fast. There aren't a lot of relievers in baseball who have had the career that David Robertson has had, where he has been an excellent relief pitcher, regardless of role, regardless of platoon left or right against him. So he really is a guy who is, to me, more valuable than the sort of reliever of the month club, where a guy has a good year and then all of a sudden he gets a big contract off of that, which is fine. I get it. But David Robertson is consistently excellent. So even at his advanced age, he should be somebody that the Mets are considering, excuse me, over the winter, if indeed their plan is to win next year.
Right. And I think that's the biggest piece of it right there, too. We do have a fan question, and it comes from Javier Amasola from YouTube. And so he's talking about Justin Verlander because, of course, there are still some trade rumors surrounding him. And Javier says, around how much of Verlander's salary would the Mets be willing to eat? Andy?
Good question. It would depend. So the way teams are calculated is value. It's money and then it's prospects. And what's the financial monetary value of said prospect or prospects? So those things become fluid in the discussions. Billy Epler might say to the Dodgers, if you give us this guy, we'll eat this much money. If you give us these two guys, we'll eat this much more money. So these things are all evolving. I'll say this more generally about Verlander, that the Mets got a good prospect in Luis Angel Acuna for Scherzer, and they ate about $35 million. Teams are looking for them to eat similar amount of money for Verlander, and the Mets will need to do much better prospect-wise in this case for Verlander. Verlander's throwing better. It's that simple. So the Mets are valuing him higher, and this hasn't gotten anywhere yet. I just published an article about it within the past hour or two. Basically, where it's at this morning is they're talking to, I'd say, 3 to 5 teams about Verlander, but they haven't gotten to the point with any of them where they're actually aggressively like exchanging names and getting to the point where it's like, okay, now let's talk financials. Now the GMs take it to their owners. Not even close yet. So with each hour that passes, it becomes less likely that he's traded because these things are complex. No trade clause. The Max Scherzer Texas talks took days. And then at the very end, when they had an agreement and Scherzer was willing to waive his no trade, it got crazy a little at the end. So these things are complex. They only have till 6 p.m. tomorrow. They're certainly willing to move Verlander, but it's just between the financials, the prospects, it's just a lot, and the no trade. And finally, I'll say that there's another variable that they're not dealing with Scherzer, which is, I'm told, the most significant holdup with trading Verlander right now, which is he has an option for 2025 where if he pitches 140 innings next season, that option vests. So teams don't know if they're buying 2 more years or 1 more year. They actually would prefer, if they're giving up a really good prospect, they want more control. So they don't know. The Mets are like, we're giving you 2.5 years of Verlander. And the Dodgers or anyone else are like, are you? Really been a holdup in talks.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, do you think that the Mets should trade Justin Verlander?
Chelsea, it goes back to what is in store for next year. If they are really going to be trying to win next year, then I think they ought to keep him because he is still, clearly from his last 7 starts, 1.49 ERA. He's looked great most of the time, maybe a few too many walks, but I think he can probably smooth that out. But he's a piece that you win with going forward if that's the aim. Now, if the aim instead is to try to be good next year, but yet really restock the farm, then of course they have to trade him. And that would be, as Andy points out, they could get something for him because he's pitching much better than Max Scherzer, who the Mets already got a good prospect for, and the control that could come with it as well. But, look, if they are indeed, what's the phrase, repurposing? Let me break open my corporate handbook to see what the various definitions of that is. Like if next year is not going to be like, hey, 3 to 5 year window, we're going to win. If it's not that kind of season, then they need to trade him. They need to trade him to the Dodgers, frankly. Looking at the prospect list, the Dodgers have an amazing amount of high-level guys who might be ready quickly versus, say, the Astros, which I know are another team that's out there. They have 1 prospect on the top 100 list for whatever all that is worth. Because as Andy points out, even the advanced prospects, we don't know that much about. There's no guarantee. They're suspects. Prospects are suspects until they become big league players and stars if they get there. So, but yeah, it's intriguing to think what they could get for him and really start the whole thing that Cohen obviously wants, which is to have a player development machine cranking out guys who are useful at the big league level.
Yeah, there's a lot of synonyms we can come up with for repurposing that Billy Epler was talking about the other day. We do have another fan question from Potsbear27 on YouTube. Andy, if there was a percentage that Verlander were to get traded tomorrow, what would it be?
Sorry, bro. I don't do the percentage game. Isn't that how Nate Silver lost his career? Percentaging the presidential elections wrong. I don't. I'm more comfortable in sort of this long form conversation that we're having about the different factors. Because look, they're talking to teams about Verlander. I think we're clear on what the obstacles are, but it's 0% right now because they haven't gotten down the road with anybody. But the second Andrew Friedman calls and says, "Okay, let's do this," then it's 100%. So I'm not trying to be difficult, but I think that those things can't be accurately stated when these things are so fluid.
Okay. Anthony, is there any interest in Jose Quintana on the trade market right now?
I mean, there should be for contenders who are looking for pitching, and they're all out there. Look, I think there are 8 teams that don't hold playoff spots that are within 5 games of a playoff spot. I mean, that's a lot of people looking for a lot of different things. So, yeah, I mean, Quintana has come back and at least put up a body of work so far, a small sample, obviously, but that he can be the guy that he's been in the past, a great suppressor of home runs, for instance. So I like the pitcher a lot, always have. He would be a nice piece for somebody to pick up now. So, yeah, if they're not circling right this moment, Chelsea, they will be as we get closer to the deadline.
Yeah. Andy, what have you heard about any Jose Quintana interest?
I agree with everything Anthony said. He's a player who could help the Mets next year. It's like a mini Verlander situation. You want him next year, for sure. And you know what? His injury is a sneaky big reason why this season went off the rails for the Mets, because he was supposed to be the Chris Bassett role of a guy who's going to give you like B+ innings. He's going to be reliable. He's going to be there every 5th day. And the bullpen has gotten so tired this year from early on from Scherzer injury and suspension, Verlander injury, just 5-6 inning starts from those guys, etc. That if Quintana had been there all year, that I think that might have really changed some things for the Mets. So they got to think about that for next year. But with the starting pitching, it looks like a pretty strong seller's market. I know for a fact they're listening on Quintana, so we'll see if anything tempts them.
Okay, speaking of next year, just like what we were talking about, with Max Scherzer gone and potentially more going, Andy, where do you see the team going to fill out the rest of the rotation for 2024?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Oh, boy.
Got it.
Yeah.
Those innings do have to be filled. Look, they are going to have to figure that out because those people are not in the organization right now. So there's a lot of different ways they could go with this. Verlander and Quintana could be 2 people taking those innings or not. We're going to find out by 6 p.m. tomorrow. And the Mets are literally being like, could be those guys, maybe not. They're weighing all these decisions right now. There are international signings they can make. There's a pitcher named Yamamoto coming out of Japan who's going to be a free agent who Billy Epler has personally scouted in Japan this year. There'll be competition there, but Yamamoto's a guy who's interesting because his Senga is kind of a 2-pitch guy who's developing the slider and cutter. He's really strong fastball, forkball, obviously. Yamamoto's more of a Bassett where he's got 4 or 5 good pitches. So he might not have the ceiling of a Senga, but he's got a lot of weapons, very intriguing player, and he doesn't seem to have the injury concerns that hurt Senga's market last year. So that's one person that's possible. There'll be other interest in him. It's not impossible they'll go for like a Jose Urias or someone on the free agent market, but I do think that the Mets era of chasing the big free agents, the Verlanders, the Scherzers, they're transitioning out of that and trying to get more into player development. So the question of who's going to pitch next year gets pretty interesting. I think we know by now that David Peterson and Tyler McGill are not the answers, although they'll be around probably. So actually, who's going to pitch next year is a really pertinent question, and it's one that's not yet been answered. Yeah.
No. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Anthony, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a great question, and it's going to be a big winter puzzle for the Mets because if they do make those trades, Verlander and Quintana, they've got a lot of openings in that rotation. Senga is the only guy, right? I'm looking at the other 2 that I wrote down were Peterson and McGill. Andy just wrote them off, and he's probably right about them. No, I'm kidding. But they did not progress the way that the Mets anticipated they would. They came into this year with all this rotation depth in those 2 guys, figuring, if something happens, Peterson, McGill will get quality innings from them. It hasn't really happened. Peterson has sort of done better recently as a reliever, so maybe there's a glimmer there with him. But Andy's right. I mean, the Mets have not, under Steve Cohen, given long-term contracts to free agent pitchers. And if you look at the list, I'm going to read a couple of names here. Urias is one of them. Blake Snell, Aaron Nola, Eduardo Rodriguez could opt out. Marcus Stroman could opt out. None of those guys profile as a yeah, right. I'm adding him to the list. That's it. I'm only
no return.
None of those guys are going to take a 3-year deal to go somewhere. So now you run into the problem of how do you sell Aaron Nola on the Mets' vision for the future for a long-term deal when you just traded all the 3 guys out of the rotation, to restock the farm system? How does he feel about winning next year with your club? That is a hill that Billy Epler and Steve Cohen and the rest of the baseball ops department's going to have to conquer over this winter, convincing guys to come here. So yeah, that the next year's rotation, if trades are made, boy, that is going to be a chore.
Yeah, this is their reality now. So a lot of questions that need to be answered. Before we move off the pitchers, there was a rumor that the Braves have checked in on Justin Verlander. Is there any truth to this, Andy?
They're not one of the 3 to 4 or 5 clubs I think that could be a real possibility for him. But I can't emphasize enough how this is hour to hour in the last 2 days before the deadline or so. Facing him next year in the division would be a tough pill to swallow for the Mets.
Can you imagine Met fans with the reaction to that?
No.
Can we get Sal? What's Sal doing right now? Can we just get him to pop in real quick on this one? The Braves.
I need to have a Sal fathead, so whenever something crazy happens, I can just hold it up. And it could just be his reaction, like, absolutely not.
There you go. You know what we should do? We should buy the AI rights to Sal's voice so we can get a Sal voice to say whatever we in these situations. Anyway, next
Yes. Okay, let's transition to the position player market. We have a question from Diane Murphy from YouTube. I'll start with you, Andy. Are Tommy Pham and Mark Canha definitely gone?
Diane, they're definitely highly likely to be gone. I would be shocked. I mean, there's absolutely no point in hanging on to those 2 players the way that the season is and trade deadline is going. The only thing I can think of with Canha is that he has a club option for next year, and the Mets like him. They love the way he plays the game. Who wouldn't? This guy is the most solid baseball player you will ever see. If he doesn't do anything other than have a great eye at the plate that really jumps out at you as a skill, but he does everything well, from the way he plays left field to the way he runs the bases to the way he prepares. So you could sort of imagine the idea of picking up that club option and seeing him as a 4th outfielder type next year. But ultimately, I think those guys will be sent packing before tomorrow evening.
I agree with you, Andy. And I think it would be near malpractice if neither one of them got traded, because, I mean, what are they doing on this club this year? And, there are other opportunities in the winter, whatever, going forward, that they should try to get anything that they can. Those were the guys that if they did a modified sell would have definitely gone also. But now that they've pushed it past that, they need to go as well. And that's no reflection on either player. Tommy Pham is a terrific offensive player who's really had a great year for the Mets and really wrested a role away for himself with the way he's played, and good for him. And as Andy said, Canha is, beyond reproach with pretty much anything that he does. He's a very solid player. I feel like he's the potential to be a winning player on a winning team, which is why he would be attractive to a contender right now, which is why the Mets should be pursuing both deals heavily.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy, the Mets and Yankees did have talks about David Robertson. Could there be Yankees interest in any of the Mets outfielderships?
Pham and Canha are not plan A for the Yankees. They're the type of player that they want. But one complication is that the Yankees highly value defense in left field. Yankee Stadium's left field from
this year notwithstanding, Andy.
Well,
their left field defense has been horrendous, but you're right. They need to improve it. So you're right.
So Anthony, fair point. I am not saying they're receiving quality defense in left field. Right. Thank you for helping me put a fine point on that. But I'm saying that when they seek to acquire left fielders, defense is extremely high priority. This is what appealed to them about Joey Gallo. This is why Brett Gardner was their left fielder for years. So what I was about to say was they actually have more square footage between the left field line and dead center than any ballpark in baseball. So they want range and speed, and Pham and Canha don't offer that. So I would say that they will go through other left field options first. And if it's deadline 6 p.m. tomorrow, if it's 5:45 and Brian Cashman hasn't found a taker for Pham and Canha, maybe he and Epler could talk at that point. But that's kind of how I see that playing out.
Yeah, Andy, which teams have you heard are interested in Pham and Canha potentially?
Good question. I don't think that's really clarified yet. I mean, I know they've gotten calls from the Dodgers. I know on both of those guys, there had been some dialogue with the Yankees, but classify it the way I just classified it. I'll say that the Max Scherzer trade took up a significant amount of the Mets' time in recent days. So Pham and Canha are the type of guys who those deals are pretty easy to pull off on deadline day, whereas Verlander are complex deals with no trades and the money and all that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if that gets hot and heavy going forward, more so than it has with clubs. But definitely the Dodgers, Orioles. Let's see what else on those guys. I could see Toronto, but again, this is more speculative because it's been about the pitchers so far for the most part.
Right. Right. Okay. We do have another fan question. This comes from Jay Sut 21 from YouTube. For you, Anthony, does Steve Cohen's new approach of developing more players change the possibility of signing Shohei Ohtani?
Well, this goes back to what we were saying before, Chelsea. Now they have put another thing on the table, if that had a chance to reality, where they have to convince Ohtani, look, we're a winning team. We are going to be in the conversation to win the World Series in 2024. And it's up to Ohtani and his representatives, obviously, to evaluate whether trading Scherzer, Verlander, and whoever else goes between now and the deadline, if that really equals Mets are a World Series threat next year, or they are a repurposed team looking to, concentrate on the farm system and that sort of thing. So look, I have no inside information on this, and I don't think Ohtani, who didn't want to be on the East Coast the first time around, I don't think it's been so awful to be in Southern California for him, as he's become the greatest baseball player who ever lived, that he's going to, throw over that idea. I think he's probably going to stay in California somewhere, or at least on the West Coast. So maybe it was always an uphill battle. Look, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but do the Mets have the same feeling? Do they know? Or, because it seems to me that they would not have operated like this if anything, we're going to put a roadblock in the way of potentially getting this unicorn player who is so good. And we've seen him do so many amazing things that you can't even be surprised when he does, amazing thing 1000, amazing thing 1001, that we've never heard of in the history of baseball. So, I think it's a fascinating question, but I don't think Ohtani's coming here.
Yeah. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I think Anthony made a lot of great points. And when you talk about the Mets' read on the situation, look, they have a really good inside source on Ohtani. Billy Epler's not talking to him now. That would be illegal in the rules of baseball. It would be tampering. But Billy Epler is the general manager who brought this guy over from Japan. He knows Shohei Ohtani as a person. And I agree with Anthony. The Mets are not behaving as a team that believes that Ohtani's coming east. They, to their credit, are not arranging things around the possibility of Ohtani. I mean, they're obviously going to look into that when Ohtani becomes a free agent. But this talk about Ohtani wanting to play on the West Coast is not just gossip. I have not personally had a heart-to-heart with Ohtani about this, but people in the game, it's not just people throwing something out there, oh, he wants to stay on the West Coast. People believe this. And perception actually is important too, because if East Coast teams believe he doesn't want to come, believe it's true, that will affect their behavior. The Yankees have tried to trade for Ohtani in 2 consecutive seasons, last year and this year, but I don't get the sense they think they're going to sign him. So that's definitely a real thing, a factor in all of this.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, from one power hitter to another, let's talk Pete Alonso. So when Max Scherzer was traded, Pete was asked about his future in New York, and he said, "I feel comfortable here. It's a great place to play. It's a great city. I would be kind of shocked, just as shocked as I was when I heard that Max got traded." So Andy, You tweeted earlier regarding Pete Alonso's status with the Mets. Can you share?
Yeah, this is my read on that. They're certainly not shopping Pete Alonso. They're listening on any and all, like, call the Mets about something, and Billy Upper will hear you out. And I think that includes, the reason I seen a few readers ask me, how come Lindor and Nimmo are being treated as off limits, but Alonso isn't, sort of subtly. And the only reason for that is that those two are under long-term, fairly untradeable contracts. That doesn't mean they're not terrific players and terrific guys. And actually, I think Nimmo and Lindor are, like, character-wise, they're the heart and soul of the team. They're not going anywhere, but they're also signed. And Alonso isn't. Alonso is only a Met through the end of next season. If he becomes a Met after that, that's a new deal, right? So he's a short-termer at this moment, and therefore it's a different category. But having said all that, it's just the front office knows how beloved he is. They know how good he is, and they're not out there shopping him. So it would really surprise me. And nothing has been talked about yet with him that's risen to the level of what we would call trade talks. I guarantee you his name has come up in phone calls because it's that time of year, but I know it hasn't progressed.
Yeah, I'm sure Mets fans are relieved to hear that. We do have another fan question from King Vic 923 from YouTube, and they say, "What does the Pete Alonso extension look like, Andy?"
Boy, well, last year's market last offseason, when the Xander Bogaerts and Trey Turners are getting well over $300 million, suggests that Pete will be really, really expensive. Now, he doesn't offer, of course, the defense that those guys offer. He's not an up-the-middle player, which is sort of more valuable because you have both sides of the ball you're more impactful on. But he's also one of the most elite power hitters in the game, like Judge, Stanton, Alonso, Ohtani. Those guys hit the ball really hard, and there's not too many people like that. So I think he's looking at a lot of money, and then teams have to say for a first baseman who would become a DH at some point in that deal, who's pushing 30 already. That's tough, and that's not a knock on Pete, but that's a tough calculation. But the free agent market gets so irrational. Like, who's the Padres of a year and a half from now that goes, fine, 13 years for Pete Alonso? It can happen.
It could. Anthony, what do you think an extension looks like?
I don't know the number offhand of what Paul Goldschmidt is playing on right now with the Cardinals. He's more accomplished than Pete, obviously, but he sort of, to me, kind of gives at least some sort of a guideline framework type thing to maybe work off of. Look, I know that there have been some Met fans out there who have speculated that, well, Aaron Judge got $360 million, so Pete's going to get, well, no, I don't think he's in that neighborhood at all. And Andy's right about the infielders. It's not the same contract. Look, Pete is a tough guy. He plays every day. He came back from that wrist thing maybe too soon, honestly, but he came back quickly from that. He's a good healer. And I think this still stands, but he's hit more home runs since he became a major leaguer than any other major leaguer. And we're talking about Ohtani's played in that thing. And some guy in the Bronx set the American League record in a single season. So that's pretty amazing stuff by Alonso. I'd love to see the Mets keep him around in whatever the extension would look like, and give him a chance he could be the greatest position player in Met history if he completes his career in Queens. And I think that would be a fun thing to follow. Yes, there would be pain at the end when he is a DH. And I agree with Andy 100% that that's where he would be headed ultimately. But I also think we would have a couple more 50 homer seasons in there. Certainly some more swings at the home run derby, which everyone seems to get into. And, he'd be the driving engine cleanup hitter of an offense. That beyond him could use a little power, so he's the main power station right now, and going forward profiles that way as well. So I'd love to see it work out.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. We have another fan question from Vehicle Ranks from YouTube. Anthony, I'll start with you. Do you think the Mets can realistically find a suitor for Vogelbach and Narvaez?
Well, you never know how teams will react as the deadline ticks near and their weaknesses play out in front of them on the field. I picture GMs in their suites on their phones watching, their DH strike out and think like, Vogelbach couldn't be any worse than this. Would they take, something and making a move in that way? Narvaez, if you're looking for a catcher, why wouldn't you trade for him, to be honest with you? Because he's a recent all-star who actually provides some offense when he plays. He's been superseded by Francisco Alvarez, and that's as it should be in Mets land right now. So he is a spare part here. The Mets should be calling teams on him. Look at who might be the catching needy out there and say like, hey, why don't we, you need a pitcher too? We got, this could be one-stop shopping here. Let's crank up the level of prospect, and we'll give you Narvaez too.
I agree with you on Narvaez, Anthony. He has value, and they are talking about him. The one holdup is his money. I think it's a $7.5 million player option for next year. So that makes sense for a team like the Mets were a couple months ago, which was, we're so all in, we're so all over the luxury tax that sure, overpay a solid catcher.
Right.
So they're a little stuck there that teams don't see that as monetary value, but Mets can pay that down. He is a good defensive catcher too. He's actually a really good player. In a sport where there's not a lot of catching, right. No way should he be rotting on the bench somewhere. He got walleye pipped by Francisco Alvarez through no fault of his own, right? But pitchers tend to, I believe, like throwing to him. His defensive stats are good, and he can hit. He just hasn't gotten the consistent playing time this year. He came out of the gate looking really good for the Mets before he got hurt, as you guys will recall, I'm sure. So, there's value there. Vogelbach, less value. But I agree with you, Anthony. Like, that's one of those, like 601, like as the deadline ends, you hear like, oh, Vogelbach to the Dodgers for cash. Okay.
Right.
It could be one of those kind of deals.
Yeah. Okay. One more fan question from Sam Sports Talk from YouTube. Andy, we'll start with you. Will Ronny Mauricio come up once Canha and Pham are dealt?
Well, you got to sell tickets somehow. You think that what the Mets will have left in this last 2 months of the season is excitement for the future. Mauricio is the last guy up. They've already promoted the other players that were being demanded, and Beatty and Vientos. So, yes, I do think we'll see Ronny Mauricio later this season.
Yeah, Andy, I agree with you, and I think that they should call him up, to be quite honest. I talked to an executive from an opposing team yesterday about Mauricio, and he suggested the idea of calling him up really would be perfect because it gives him a chance in a developmental time to get some major league at-bats. The coaching staff can sort of protect him if he's flailing a little bit at first. If he goes 0 for 20 to start, they can protect him with matchups, dictating the matchups initially. And this removes the idea of next spring training that there's all this Ronny Mauricio hype of he's got to make the team, you got to make the team, to where he's putting undue pressure on himself in spring training, which sometimes is not really a great barometer of where a guy is and in his career and is in his development. Whereas if he's playing against teams that are pursuing something now in the last 2 months of the season, he's getting A stuff. He's not getting Joey Walnuts from AA, who's getting a little extra work in, when he bats in the 9th inning. He's coming in and he's facing somebody's closer in a game that the other team needs. So, he'll get the experience in games that count of teams adjusting to him and him having to adjust back, that little cat and mouse of baseball that has destroyed so many careers, frankly, because some guys can't make the adjustments. So we'll see if he can. He's a promising guy, still has some holes in his game, so much swing and miss. He had a great start, then he sort of leveled off, and then he's come on again to where every time you open up Twitter, he's hitting a 450-foot home run to win a game or something, doing something dynamic and athletic. I'd love to see it on the major league level, and this is a rare opportunity, if this is the way this season is going to go for the Mets, to get him up here.
Yeah,
I agree with everything you said, Anthony, except Walnuts is actually one of the guys they're looking to get from the Dodgers, Joey Walnuts. So I wouldn't necessarily downplay
the crafty veteran.
But the one thing you mentioned, this is a tangent, but it's a quick tangent. But I think Twitter is such a detriment to what the perception of player development has become with these prospects, because we see that bomb. But I know this frustrated the heck out of the Mets with Brett Beatty. It was like he's hitting a bomb on Twitter, and we're seeing the clip. But it's like the scout is I'm not you obviously know this, but I think it's worth sharing with the audience that
Absolutely.
the scout is seeing 9 innings of defense that still needs work. The scout is seeing the pitch that he chased out of the zone and before that, and the scout's not seeing that it's a right-handed pitcher that threw the pitch that he hit for the home run going 87 miles an hour, and that guy doesn't exist in the major league. So the social media is a I think a real challenge for teams with this kind of stuff, but that's not what we're talking about.
No, I mean, what do you mean? Twitter's an amazing place. Doesn't give us any issues at all.
I'm sorry.
Andy. Are you kidding?
X. It's called X.
Oh yeah,
I refuse to acknowledge that.
Yes, it's X.
Okay. With Billy Epler saying that the Mets are not punting in 2024, even though it kind of seems like they're going towards that direction, let's take a quick peek into what next season will hold. So, Anthony, do you see the team taking a step back next season or still keeping their foot on the gas to potentially win it all or be contending?
I think they'll have a lot of pieces in place, Chelsea, that could make them a good team. This team kind of came into the season as potentially a great team, at least on paper, at least with acquisitions and the guys who had played the way they had early in their career. And of course, that all went kaplooey. So look, I don't think that they're totally punting 2024, but I don't think they're looking to be, the belle of the ball either going into the season where they were everybody's pick, because not only did Steve Cohen's money buy all these players, but Steve Cohen's money can fix any mistakes that they've made in season. We saw this year that that's just not true. They've got some work to do with this team. I still think 2024 will be an interesting season. I don't know if we're going to watch a pennant race, but maybe if Pete Alonso is a 55 home run guy, Jeff McNeil isn't hitting 248, and things fall into place. Look, I mean, a lot of our talk today has been about, the front office and what the front office has done and will do, and Steve's money and all that stuff. But the players have been a crushing failure this year. As a team, they have not played up to their potential, not in any way by either their levels, their expectations, or the team's at all. So there's a lot of blame to go around. Next year, can they push through and past that? I think there's a possibility of that.
Yeah. Andy, do you have any names that could potentially be available this offseason or even at the deadline that you think could be in play for the Mets?
In terms of helping next year?
Yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, they do this. The guy they got, Luis Angel Acuna, is still in AA, but could be somebody who's in the mix in the big leagues by the end of next season if he continues to develop at the pace that he's developing. In terms of, I think the other answers to that go back to some of our earlier conversations here, Chelsea, about who's available in the free agent market. Are they really going to move your Brooks Raley? I don't think we really talked about him, but under control next year. Quintana under control next year. Other than that, we can look at a list of free agents and say, well, who are you going to bring in? Who's going to pitch? I mean, then we're used to Steve Cohen chasing the big fish, but James Paxton's going to be a free agent. There's guys like that you bring in to fill some innings. Like a couple of years ago when the Mets brought in Rick Porcello and Michael Wacha, I know that didn't work out, but there's a lot of people out there, a lot of names, a lot of free agents that could be in play. More broadly, I think with the 2024 Mets, to that question, I think they're looking at a tough reality in a division where the Braves are not going anywhere anytime soon. The Phillies are in their window to win now. The Marlins are on the rise. Plenty of flawed teams are in the wild card race every year, and the Mets, thank goodness for us watching and covering New York baseball, and those of you who are watching, root for these teams. They're never going into a rebuild. They're never going to tank. They're never going to enter a season where we think zero chance to make the playoffs. But certainly the way the rest of the division looks, next year it looks smarter to build toward, let's try to be a wild card contender next year than let's try to win this brutal division.
Yeah.
Marlins are out there adding, right?
Yeah, right.
It's amazing that the Marlins, what they've done, they're still out there looking too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, wrapping things up here. The Mets travel out to Kansas City for 3, followed by the Orioles for 3 as well, finishing